What's up, homies? Welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be about a topic that I'm really excited to talk about because I've been thinking about this for a really long period of time as a solution for bringing up lagging or stubborn growing muscle groups. So this is going to be a bit of a different approach and maybe not the most best case scenario approach, but that's the whole reason for the video. The whole reason is that you're going to have these muscle groups that are not best case scenario, that are not going to grow fast and are not going to respond very well to training as compared to other people. And that's just natural. You're not going to have, unless you have extremely elite genetics, you're not going to have every single one of your muscle groups grow really fast and equally. And that's just what it is. It's genetic. It's genetically determined what muscle groups are going to, for you, naturally grow quicker, which ones are going to recover better and faster, and how much muscle you're able to put on at a time, how quickly, and stuff like that. Obviously, those things like your training can be dialed in and your nutrition can be dialed in order to alter those things in your favor to properly grow as much as you can, but your genetics will dictate and limit how much you are realistically able to change and affect these things. So I just wanted to talk and give my theory on what you could do, and I'm testing this currently on myself in these blocks of training, how to bring up lagging muscle groups. So let's get into it. So let's go over how muscle growth actually works first so that you can get an understanding, because this will apply later. I wouldn't skip this part because it really will give you the base understanding of why the way that I think is what it is and why I think this should work. So, muscle growth. What muscle growth essentially is, that most people don't prefer to look at it as, is not just you getting bigger and stronger. Your muscle growth is quite literally just your muscles recovering. The only difference is that, say, you expend a lot of energy for the day. You just run around a lot. You're at school, whatever, playing sports. Your muscles are going to recover, but it's going to be different than when they grow because you're not applying mechanical tension to your muscles. You're not specifically lifting weights and stuff like that. Your muscles are just like here, and then as you start to use your energy, your muscles get tired, and then they need time to recover to get back to baseline. So when you apply a strenuous amount of mechanical tension via lifting weights over a period of time with a certain amount of volume, not only will your energy dip and then go back up to baseline, but once it goes back up to baseline, it continues and it grows a little bit. So your muscle growth is just recovery. Your muscles are recovering and they're just growing a little bit. And then how much volume you do kind of will help dictate or determine how much extra your muscles will recover past baseline. So now that I've explained that part, now I can get into my reasoning behind what I think could be the solution for this. So, as I mentioned, everyone has different genetics. Everybody has different muscle groups that will recover faster, that will grow easier. And I will give myself as an example. I originally thought my shoulders for sure grew a lot faster. It's kind of hard to tell now because I don't do a whole lot of shoulder training because they do. But for 100%, my quads grow really quickly, very easily. Very blessed in the quads and my back. My back explodes when I do any kind of focus on my back, like my lats and just any of my back in general, honestly. So I don't really have to focus or emphasize those muscle groups in terms of my training, like prioritizing them in order to make them grow really fast. But the thing where I do suffer is my arms. And not to say like I got the smallest arms in the whole world, but compared to my back and my quads and my shoulders, my arms are severely lacking. And I don't want to say severely, but they are significantly lacking. And no matter what I felt that I would do, you can always dial things in a little bit more. In my training, they still would not be catching up to the rest of your muscle groups. And you also have to take this with a grain of salt and realize that literally there is nothing that I can do that will make my triceps and biceps grow as fast as my quads and my back, no matter what. Like, if I train them the same amount, there's literally nothing I can do to make my biceps and triceps grow as fast as those muscle groups, because that's just genetically dictated. But what I do believe, now that you understand, like, my first explanation of that muscle growth is essentially just recovery, and recovery past your baseline. My theory is that basically it's not just that you have muscles that grow really easily, it's that your genetics determine what, in priority, with a certain amount of hierarchy and priority, which muscles recover first. Therefore, they get a majority of the growth adaptations, because you only have a limited amount of growth, of muscle growth, that you can get per day, per week, whatever. You don't have unlimited muscle growth. It's not like you get 100% of your muscle growth for your shoulders, 100% for your biceps, 100%. No, it's 100% of your body's total capacity of muscle growth for your entire system, for your abs, for your arms, for your shoulders, for your back, for your chest, for your legs, all that. So what happens in theory, this is what I believe, is that basically your body has a genetically predetermined hierarchy of what muscles are going to not just recover quicker, but where the growth adaptation portion of this recovery is going to go towards first. So for me, it seems like my back and my quads always tend to get this growth first before all my other muscle groups. So basically what I'm getting at here is that your weakest muscle group, or the muscle groups that you have the most difficulty growing, so for me it'd be my arms and my calves, which calves can be a pretty common one, but some people are pretty blessed. But since my arms are all the way down here, what my theory is that if I eliminate the amount of volume that I'm doing, that would cause growth adaptations. So for the rest of my muscle groups other than my arms, if I were to lower the volume to such a level that I'm not really even growing anything, I'm strictly maintaining muscle, that would leave all the leftover growth adaptations that would normally be going to my whole body, including my arms, just to my arms. So basically, what I would be doing is lowering my volume, the total volume for every single muscle group: my chest, my back, my chest, my back, my shoulders, legs, all that stuff. I am lowering the volume all the way to as low as I can to still maintain these muscle groups and not really intentionally try to grow them as much as possible, or try to even grow them at all. So I'm basically lowering all my body's total volume, except for my biceps and triceps, down to about 1 to 2 working sets per week. About 1 to 4 sets. But the reason for that is that, like I said, your body, if you do a bunch, or not a bunch of volume, if you do very, very, very little volume, your body will boop and go back up to baseline, like I said, and maybe it'll grow like a tiny bit. But sometimes if you just do only enough volume to maintain, like I said, similar to how whenever you just exercise your body and you're not actually lifting weights, your body will be at baseline, you exercise, goes back up to baseline, and doesn't grow any further. So when you are lowering the volume, that's essentially what you were doing for the rest of your body. So for the rest of my muscles, I'm working them out just very little, and then they're just recovering. They're not actually using the growth aspect of the recovery, which is what happens when you do a certain amount of volume with a certain amount of intensity. You actually stimulate muscle growth. And since there is 100% total muscle growth that your body can do at a time, my theory is that if I eliminate as much as I can any of those muscle growth adaptations that go towards the rest of my body, and strictly focus on using those to the lacking muscle groups part, that as much muscle growth as possible for that slow growing muscle group will go there. So this isn't going to be optimal, as in I'm going to be technically stagnating a little bit for the rest of my muscle groups for a period of time, or growing them very slowly, which for me, I don't care at this point because my muscle groups, so my arms, grow so slowly for me that it is worth it for me for a certain amount of time, whether that be like a couple months, to just focus on growing my arms. It's worth it to me, even though the rest of my muscle groups are either not growing or are growing just a little bit at a time, because they're so behind in terms of development that I just need them time to catch up. Even if that means when I say that they hypothetically do catch up to the rest of my physique, then I start training like I normally would, and they're still now they're growing really slow again. That's okay because they've had time to actually catch up with my physique, if that makes sense. Because I'm still going to need to maybe prioritize them in terms of training whenever I go back to a normal training once they have caught up, so that they can stay kind of caught up with the rest of my physique as it develops. But the problem right now is that they are underdeveloped, and this is for developing an underdeveloped muscle group quickly, or bringing up a stubborn growing muscle group up to par with the rest of your physique in a quick way, so that you're not having to, in a way, slowly do it over a long period of time. Because like I said, my arms grow very slowly, and I could either heavily emphasize my training on my arms for a very long period of time, so like 2 years straight, and maybe technically they could catch up a little bit by then, but realistically my arms still grow so slow that that's unlikely to really happen. So the easiest way for me to really be able to just grow them quickly and bring them up to the rest of my muscle groups, up to my personal satisfaction at least, is by dialing in the training specifically for my arms for a certain amount of time and lowering the volume for everything else. So there are some caveats to this, and you need to realize this isn't just do a bunch of volume for your lagging muscle groups and do very little volume for everything else. It's always, if you're going to want to try this method, which I still am testing it out, I'm going to bring in my total measurements and stuff like that, which I believe my arms are currently at about 15 1/8 inches. So that's what they're currently at. But when it comes to volume, for the rest of your muscle groups, you are going to be able to even still progress, maybe slowly, but stay the same size for your muscle groups at 1 to 2 sets per muscle group per week. So you can get away with doing 1 to 2 sets per muscle group per week for the rest of your muscle groups, and you will maintain the same size. You won't be getting smaller, which is the main problem. Is you just want to avoid like losing muscle mass. But as long as you're eating enough protein and getting in your recovery, you will not lose muscle mass. It's very easy to maintain muscle. That's a common misconception. People think that if you just don't do enough volume, you're going to lose muscle. No, it's hard to gain muscle, but it's not like super easy to lose muscle as long as you're getting enough recovery and eating enough protein. But the main thing when it comes to this that is going to make it the most effective is paying attention to what muscle group you are doing and how much volume you should do according to that, and the amount of volume you should be doing according to you and your recoverability and your genetics. So the first thing I'm going to mention for the volume, so you can figure out how much volume to do for these muscle groups that you were trying to bring up, is that I'll give the general rule and then the possibility of exception. So for the general rule, usually the bigger the muscle group is, the less volume it can really take, because since it's such a big muscle, when you really fatigue it, it takes longer for it to recover, which means it can grow more because it is a bigger muscle, like things such as your chest and your legs, like your hamstrings, your quads, your chest, and sometimes like your lats and your back, but mostly just your quads, your chest, and your hamstrings. Those muscles will, and your glutes as well, I believe. They're huge muscles, so you can't do as much volume. You can't destroy them and expect them to recover as much, because the bigger the muscle group is, the more it has to recover. That's just what makes sense. If you break down a building that's gigantic, of course it's going to take a really long time to build it back up, versus a really tiny, small, like pop-up lemonade stand. You destroy it and you can build it in like an hour or two. And that's the same thing that applies for your muscles. So that's the general rule, is that the bigger the muscle group, the less volume it really can handle in terms of when you're bringing it close to failure. So for the smaller muscle groups, they can usually, and again, this is the general rule of thumb, this is not the end all be all. The smaller muscle groups can tend to be able to handle more volume and be able to recover. So this is the general rule. I want to emphasize, though, that does not mean do as much volume as you can that your muscles are able to do. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm going to bring in the exception rule. Or the exception aspect of this. So everybody has a certain genetic determination of how much your muscles can really recover. So I can have a friend named Billy down the street who he can do 25 sets of biceps a week in close to failure, and he can recover phenomenally. But I could do 25 sets of biceps and not recover for 3 to 4 days, and I'm still extremely sore. Well, if that's the case, I probably shouldn't do that much volume if by the time I get to my next training session, I'm still extremely sore and I'm not as strong as I was the last session. That means I haven't recovered. The best way you can tell you haven't recovered properly, which basically means you're doing too much volume or you're not recovering enough, is that if you still have DOMS, so delayed onset muscle soreness, so your muscles are still really sore, and or your strength is not the same or stronger than what it was the last time you worked out. Because theoretically, you should be getting stronger every single session. And whether that has to do with your actual programming being crappy and like you not doing a proper workout regimen or recoverability, the majority of the time it's going to have to do with your recoverability. If you can tell that you're sore and your muscles are tired and they're not as strong as what they were before and they're getting weaker, then you're definitely still sore and you need to lower the volume. So you need to pay attention to yourself. And the best way you can do this, and this is going to seem extra, but if you're really serious about wanting to grow it, what I would do is write down just on a piece of paper, write down each muscle group: hamstrings, quads, back, shoulders, etc. Or even just the muscle groups that you're trying to bring up. And I want to emphasize that I would only recommend bringing up one and at the very most 2 muscle groups at a time in this fashion that I'm explaining, which is lowering the volume for everything else and raising the volume for the lagging or stubborn muscle groups. Anyways, you want to write down all the muscle groups or just the main muscle group or muscle groups that you are trying to bring up. And you want to write down the lower to higher end of volume that your muscle is able to handle in terms of recoverability, and then write down and figure out how much volume makes sense. So, for example, when it comes to the lower extremities or the big muscle groups, so your quads, your chest, and your hamstrings, usually they'll be able to handle anywhere from about, like when worked out very, very hard, up to 10, maybe a little bit more sets per week, but around like 4 to about 10 sets per muscle group per week if you're really, really, really working them out hard. Maybe on the higher end 12, but 12 is you're working it out very, very hard, and that's dangerous territory because you really want to make sure you're getting the maximum amount of recoverability. And for the for the other muscle groups, so the ones that are smaller muscle groups that are able to recover easier and quicker, what I would recommend is for the lower limit, doing something about like 4 to 6 sets per week. 2, and this is a high number, which I am emphasizing, this does not mean do this because it's the highest number. 20 sets per week, something like that, which you could even maybe do more than that. But I'm just going to say about 20 sets per muscle group per week if you're going close to failure. So, now that I've established that, now you need to determine what is actually realistic. And this is the biggest, most important part. If you were going to do this method, you need to make sure that you are actually not just maximizing in terms of like best case scenario, but that you are maximizing in terms of realisticness, how much muscle growth are you going to be able to get according to what your current lifestyle is and how much recovery you're able to get. if you don't have enough money to eat very high protein or high protein enough to grow a lot of muscle, if you know that you have a very crappy sleep schedule, you eat like crap, and you don't train very hard, it does not make sense to do a ton of volume or the upper limit of what your muscle is able to handle, of what a muscle group is able to handle and recover from, because it doesn't make sense. It literally just on paper, it doesn't make sense, because that is the upper limit is the best case scenario of you have everything dialed in. You are getting great sleep. You are having all your dietary needs met. You are having lots of protein, and you just have your training locked in. And that's going to be best case scenario. But if you know your lifestyle is not best case scenario, you need to determine, should you go towards the lower end of that spectrum, or should you go towards the higher end of that spectrum? I want to emphasize this because more does not equal more gains. More volume doesn't equal more gains, because it has been shown time and time again through research that you can actually get growth through 1 to 2 sets per muscle group per week. You get about 64% of the gains or something like that just from doing like 1 to 2 sets per muscle group per week, which is insane. That's great. That's great growth. So if you are lowering the rest of your muscle group's volume down to a degree to where they're not even growing, even if you just do slightly more than low volume, so even if you just do moderate volume for your lagging muscle groups, in theory, you should be getting a lot of gains still from that. So don't take this time to do as much volume as you can for these muscles, but do as much as you need and are 100% sure you can recover from. Because I promise, if you do less volume, but you know you're able to recover from it, then doing a little, you're pushing the boundary of how much you think you can recover from, and you're not actually recovering from it properly, you're going to make more gains. Like you will gain more muscle by doing less volume if you know for certain you're going to be able to recover from it. So just pay attention to those things, and make it a sliding scale. This is the maximum amount of volume I can do. This is the least volume that I should do if I'm really trying to maximize growth for muscle, and how much can I recover from it? I'm getting great sleep. I'm getting great protein, but my training's It's like, okay, maybe you should be right here. Crappy for all of them, probably closer down here. And if you're somewhere in the middle, then go in the middle. But like I said, that's how I would recommend determining your volume. But I don't think I have much more to say other than that. But personally, what I'm doing right now, I'm testing out my volume for my biceps and triceps. I feel, and again, this is what I think right now, that my triceps are able to handle a pretty good deal of volume. So somewhere close to about 14 to 18 sets per week when I'm doing this, at least. So whenever I'm lowering the volume for everything else. But there's only one way to find out. So you need to pay attention to your training and don't just set it in stone from the beginning and then keep going with it. If you realize, if you were hitting muscle group and it's like 3 to 4 days later and you're still like sore and the muscle's still not like recovered, you're probably doing too much volume. And you're doing too much volume for how much recovery you're getting, or even if you're getting the maximum amount of recovery and you still are sore and stuff like that, then you're for sure doing too much volume. But like I said, I'm doing about 14 to 18 working sets per week for my triceps, because my triceps, for some reason, they tend to be able to take more volume and be able to recover better, which for most people, I think that's not quite the case. I think your triceps actually tend to need more recovery because they're a bit bigger than the biceps. And for my biceps, I think I'm doing anywhere from, 12 to 16 sets per week, because my biceps are kind of the same as my triceps, but maybe a little bit less. And that's what I'm doing, I think maybe like 14 to 16 sets per week for my biceps training. So that's what I'm currently doing. That might change depending on if I notice that my biceps aren't recovering in time to my next session, etc. But you also, last thing, want to make sure that you're hitting your muscle groups at least 2 times a week if you want to really maximize the amount of growth. So that's all I got for y'all today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully it was informative. I'll let y'all know about my results. Arms, like I said, are currently at a staggering 15.125 inches. So Thank y'all homies for watching. Hopefully y'all have a great day. I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace out, gamers.